Hello and welcome to the Finding Proof live show. Today I'm going to be talking to you about two things that seem completely unrelated to one another. I'm going to talk about the concept of leaning in, which is a bit of a buzz phrase that, there are books written on this topic. There are, many in the personal development space and the leadership space who talk about leaning in, Brené Brown being one, of course. I'm also going to be talking about bees, which seem to have absolutely nothing to do with finding proof. But if that's your thought, then I'm going to prove you wrong today, because I have a story to tell you about bees. Now, today is the day before a big birthday in my family, and I have spent the morning shopping for just those special little treats that are going to make somebody very excited tomorrow morning. It's also had me thinking about milestones and big events and big decisions. So, that train of thought, when you're thinking about one thing and before you know it, you're thinking about something completely unrelated, but your thoughts have sort of gone dot by dot by dot along a little path until you found yourself thinking about something else. So today I've been thinking about this concept of leaning in. So you might have heard Brené Brown talk about this when she talks about leadership, and she talks about daring bravely. Kim Scott talks about a similar concept when she's talking about leaning in to difficult emotions and difficult conversations. And I think those two incredibly talented writers, those two women, are right on the money. If we are in a leadership space of any kind, you could be a sole entrepreneur running your own business, but sometimes you have to have difficult conversations, whether that's with your bank manager or your partner who wants to know, why is it taking so long for your business to do anything? You and I know that there are times in our professional careers and our business careers when we need to walk the lonely path, when nobody else is in our minds, nobody else is in our heads, nobody else sees the big picture that we've got very clearly visualized in our minds. And we sometimes have to lean into the fear that others are feeling for us, which can influence how they speak to us and the judgment perhaps that we feel as well. Now, as you know, next year I'm launching a mentoring program that will tackle some of these issues and teach skills in how to find that proof within yourself that you can lean into scary conversations, you can lean into difficult feelings, and you can draw on some inner strengths and courage that you have overlooked in yourself. There are lots of examples that we all have in our own histories of times where we've leaned into difficult conversations or difficult experiences. So I won't go into it too much today because it's quite a big, meaty topic, and certainly in the program that I'm going to be running next year, it really does cover a number of sessions. It spreads across a number of sessions because it is so big and so weighty. But I would like you, if you've got a minute with a cup of tea perhaps today, to sit quietly and reflect on times in your own life where you felt afraid, or you felt judged, or you felt somehow a bit wobbly about something that you need to do or really, really want to do, and you've done it anyway. Those times when we've done things that might not seem like super courageous things. We're not talking about jumping off tall buildings here. We might be talking about having a difficult conversation with an employee. Or we might be talking about, I often am finding myself noticing when others around me aren't necessarily on top of their game, or aren't necessarily their usual selves, their usual bubbly selves. And my first response is the same as anybody else's. It's to avoid a difficult conversation. That's a really normal and natural self-protective response. But what I find myself increasingly comfortable doing is noticing that initial response and letting it slide away so I can lean into that uncomfortable feeling and that difficult conversation sometimes and say, what's going on? What can I do to help you? Or this isn't up to your normal standard. Is there something I can do to make this easier for you? Those conversations don't need to be as awkward and as difficult as we build them up to be in our minds. It's when we listen too much to those fears and those self-criticisms and the fear of judgment, fear of being wrong. You know how sometimes you need to have a tricky conversation with someone and you're worried that what if I'm actually imagining this? What if there's actually no problem at all? Or what if I'm the problem? So sometimes, especially as leaders, we really do need to lean into that fear and lean into that feeling of wrongness and walk through it. As many of you know, most of my clinical work as a psychologist is in the perinatal field, so working with new parents or aspiring parents. And I often talk about those feelings of awkwardness and anxiety and worry and fear and judgment and criticism that new parents experience when they're adjusting to being a first-time parent. I often say to them, first of all, those feelings are normal. Pretty much all of us experience that when we are making that transition into parenthood and learning. You know, the first few months in particular are just fraught with fear and anxiety and worry. We don't always talk about it openly with each other, but 9 times out of 10 we feel those things. I often say to people it's a little bit like labour. The only way through it is through it. You know, you have to persist, you have to keep your eyes on the big picture. And with parenting, of course, the big picture is providing a safe and nurturing environment so that your baby can thrive and grow, just as you as a parent are learning how to become a parent so that you, and in your parenting role, can thrive and grow. The same is true of leadership, the same is true of business, the same is true of expanding your career. You're stepping into new waters. You're stepping into unfamiliar territory, and that can be terrifying. So we need to sometimes lean into that fear and say, okay, it's allowed to be there. That's a normal reaction. It's intended to keep me safe, but I don't have to let it call the shots. So where do the bees come into it? I hear you yelling at me. So here's a practical, real-world example of me having to do exactly that. So yesterday afternoon, it was school pickup time and I was collecting my younger son from school. Now, I was waiting outside the classroom door and it was a beautiful afternoon. The sun was shining. There was not a cloud in the sky. Just stunning Hobart early summer weather. But I heard the kids yelling from inside the classroom, "It's snowing! It's snowing!" I'm thinking, well, it's not snowing. What are they on about? So I peeked through the classroom door and I saw all the children had rushed to the windows on the other side of the classroom and they were looking out at what initially I thought it was seeds from a tree or grass being kicked up by a lawnmower, but when I looked more intently I noticed it was bees. Outside their whole wall is windows in this classroom, and the whole wall of windows was a mass of bees flying around the window. And as I stood outside the classroom, there's an undercover area outside the classroom, I turned and I looked to where I was standing, and beyond the undercover area was all bees. So the whole building was enveloped in a cloud of bees. Now, if you're familiar with the news, the Australian news, you may have even seen, who knows, it may have made some international news, that there was a swarm of bees that settled on a roadworks sign in the centre of Hobart yesterday, and perhaps after that story was documented they decided to pick themselves up and come over to my son's school for a little bit of an excursion. I don't know. We had to get from the classroom to the car. That had to happen. And I stood for a minute in fear. I watched the parents around me. How were they reacting? And this is a trick. When you are anxious about something, when you're nervous about something, have a look around you. How are other people reacting? That's exactly the strategy I use when I'm on a plane, when we hit turbulence. I look to the cabin crew. Do they look concerned? Are they still serving drinks? Then I don't need to worry. So I had a look at what the other parents were doing. I could see parents carrying toddlers on their with the toddler's head resting on their shoulder and walking calmly through the swarm of bees. I knew that bees are not like wasps. They're not aggressive in the same way that wasps can be. And it was a cloud of them. They weren't protecting a hive. Now, I'm not a bee scientist. I know they have a name, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. Is it apiarist? Apiarist, I think. I'm not an apiarist. But I watched the behaviour of the people and I watched the behaviour of the bees. And I decided to lean into my fear of walking through this cloud of bees with my son, because I had him there with me as well. And I was talking him through his nerves about the bees. And he said to me something really wise. He said, perhaps if we blend into our environment, the bees won't notice us. They'll think we're a flower. So along the exterior wall of the school is a beautiful mural, and it has all the native animals of Tasmania painted on it. So there's a beautiful blue wren. There's a beautiful painting of an echidna and a Tasmanian devil and other native Tasmanian animals. And I said to my son, let's walk closer to the wall. And that way, as the bees are swarming around us, of course, it's a little bit like it creates its own little awning in a way, because you're closer to the wall and they're swarming over to the side. And we walked quite bravely through this cloud of bees. Now, it wasn't a small, tight-knit mass. It was like the whole of the air was full of bees. That's how it felt. And as I was walking bravely through this cloud of bees, I thought, this is what leaning in is all about. This is seeing something that frightens you, weighing up what you can do, what you can control, and stepping into your fear, knowing that you're afraid, knowing that you need to be conscious of the risks, but doing the thing anyway. So we made it very safely to our car. There was no risk of us being stung by these bees that were looking for their house. We walked through, and it was such an amazing experience. I'm sure my son will never forget it. I certainly won't. And driving away from the school with this echoing in my mind, this idea of leaning into fear. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to know that when you're embarking on some social media marketing for your business, it's going to make you afraid. You're going to be worried about judgment. You're going to be worried about getting stung by other people's criticisms. But you can do it anyway. Because I know you. I know you're not going to get on social media topless. Okay? That's pretty much the limit. I know you're not going to get out there trying to promote your business by pushing inappropriate content. Because that's pretty much the limit. Everything else is okay. You're going to do what's best for your business. Now, sometimes you'll get it right. Sometimes you'll be a bit off the mark. Same goes for me. But you can only try these things. So when you next have a big decision to make, it might be stepping into a difficult conversation with a work colleague or an employee or a bank manager or a partner, you're going to feel that fear. You're going to feel that worry about being in trouble. Don't we all hate that feeling? I hate that feeling. I still get that feeling sometimes. But we can stand our ground. We can tap into that courage. You can think of my bees if it helps you. You can stand your ground, lean into that feeling, acknowledge it and let it pass. Say, I can still do this even though I'm afraid. And that, my friend, is the very definition of courage and bravery. Doing the thing even though you're a little bit afraid or a big bit afraid. Thank you so much. I can see that I've got a few of you with me live today. Hello, Chris. Hi, Melissa. Hello, Melly. Hi, Donna. And you're very welcome, Donna. I'm glad that was helpful to you to hear today. So think about the next time that something pops up in your world that has you feeling doubt and fear and self-criticism and self-judgment. Acknowledge that feeling. Let it pass like a cloud passing over the sun, or like a swarm of bees passing over a primary school. And do the thing anyway. Because I know that you can, because I know that you've done things like that before. Maybe not as dramatic as my bee story, but I know that every single one of us has an experience in our past, either distant or recent, that demonstrates that we do have that courage. And that's what Finding Proof's all about. That is what we're here for, is to uncover that evidence of just how brave you can be. That's all from me today. I do hope you'll have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you soon next week. Bye-bye.